it is 3:30. Let's call the meeting of the Police and Fire Commission to order. Would the clerk do roll call, please?
I will do my very best to do this.
Commissioner Schultz,
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Hartwick,
Commissioner Raub.
here.
Present.
Yes. Russ
Yes,
is,
He is
Yep.
absent.
Yep.
Also present, City Manager Hausman, myself, Deputy Clerk Courtney Tome, and we have
from GovHR, Tim Sasko.
Okay. All right. We have the minutes from the July 24th meeting. Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. City Manager Hausman, we are reviewing and possible revisions to the EMS or the fire EMS chief position.
Correct. I do want to introduce the group to Tim Sasko. He works with GovHR. He is the recruiter that is assigned to the fire chief recruitment for the city of Fort Atkinson. So Tim, maybe if you want to just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in the field.
Certainly, Rebecca, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody today. Tim Sasko, as Rebecca said, I was in the fire service for just under 40 years, having served as the chief of 2 suburbs in Lake County, Illinois. Most of my career was in the first one, which was in Buffalo Grove, and then the second one was in Mundelein. I subsequently also have been on the Board of Health in Lake County since 2003, so I'm very intimately involved with public health throughout Lake County, and took over as the chairman of the board in 2014 as appointed, and have been in that position since, and had certainly quite the experience in tying together both EMS and public health within Lake County. We still continue to build a lot of synergistic environments with it. I also sit on the W.S. Darley Advisory Board. W.S. Darley is about a $500 million a year corporation based out of Itasca, Illinois. Specialized when it first started, when Grandpa Bill Darley started the company back just after 1900, as a supplier of fire service commodities, including apparatus. They're the largest provider of fire trucks to China, believe it or not. And but they're really known for their pumps, their pump divisions up in Chippewa Falls. So they're very germane to the general Chicago, Wisconsin market. And so I've had that pleasure of serving on the board for the Darley Brothers. It is a privately held corporation. It is not traded, and just an extremely wonderful success story, and great to be around. And so doing a bunch of other stuff with United Way, and you name it, I'm all over the place. I'm supposed to be quasi-retired, but I started with GovHR 5 years ago, and just really enjoy the recruitment process. I run all of our assessment centers for fire chiefs and police chiefs. Have worked across the country from small communities like Monroe, Wisconsin to Orlando, Florida last year. So scaling is something that I'm very accustomed to, and I have no problem with doing. So it'll be really exciting. We've done a lot of projects. GovHR does have a Milwaukee office, and we do a lot of projects throughout the Wisconsin market. I was most recently in Monroe, Beloit, Wisconsin, South Milwaukee. I'm about to start Menominee Falls here pretty shortly because a dear friend of mine who's the chief there is leaving. So I'm familiar with the PFC process and everything that goes into a recruitment in Wisconsin. So it's great to see everybody, and look forward to bringing this one home. Take care.
Thank you.
So in your packet, you have a redlined version of a position description. These are Tim's edits that he provided, and then you have the draft version that was originally provided, I believe, with the information for the Police and Fire Commission way back when we accepted the letter and found out that Chief Roush was leaving. So that is the draft that was. I didn't have an approved draft originally, so this was what I had what I found. And we put it into the new format. And then I provided that to Tim, who provided the edits, the red lines, which you can see in your packets. I also got some feedback from Commissioner Turk, as he will not be here today. I did just forward that to Jean and Tim, and I apologize, I didn't do that in advance, but I have hard copies for the commission here. I know, Philip, you've already seen that.
I've seen it.
But I have hard copies for the other commission members. Yep.
Yep.
And Courtney, I'll bring one over to you as well.
I have that.
You have this? Okay, perfect. Okay, so that was just Commissioner Turk's thoughts on the job description. My goal today would be to answer a few questions. I have a couple things that I think we need to make sure we consciously address here today. And that those three major things would be the title for the position, whether or not we want to incorporate EMS or emergency management in that title. And we'll get some feedback from Tim as he looks at a lot of these position descriptions all the time, and the titles as well, and how sometimes a title can impact the types of people or the people who would apply for the job. And then the second piece that I want to make sure we address is the education and certifications piece. And then the third would be the salary range that's actually not included in the position description. The position description includes a pay grade. So we can talk a little bit about that pay grade. And then, and of course, that part is dependent on the second one, education and certifications. So with that, I guess I would ask for input from the commission if they have specific things. Tim, I'm sorry, before we get feedback from the commission, Tim, are there specific things in this that you added or edited here that are not kind of customary, or things that that you have typically seen, anything strange that was in it or that you added to that we would want to be aware of in general?
Not really. When we look at fire EMS operations across the country, I mean, they're all fairly much providing the same services, and they only expand in job description requirements or contract a little bit. I did Augusta, Georgia a couple of years ago. They are fire only. Their EMS system is a county-wide operation. So what I tried to do after Rebecca and I had our kickoff meeting was look at the fact that this is going to become the chief of all hazards with the responsibilities of EMS as well as emergency management. I will say to the commission, there's always a misunderstanding about emergency management. A lot of people think it's either police light or fire light, and it really is not. In the true model, it is its own agency that would make the triangle of public safety services when you look at situations like Hurricane Katrina or any of those. The emergency management function is a supplier. It's a commodities provider for all the resources that the operational people need with law enforcement and fire. So it is very customary to have fire chiefs in a dual role position. It can sometimes be, quite honestly, difficult because if for some reason, you look at our tornado activity just in the Midwest this year is unprecedented. And ironically, I heard the other day, Illinois is leading the country in tornadoes this year. But as an example, if you had something like that, because that is not something void of your area, what the fire chief can do simultaneously between the two is a lot of plate spinning. And it can be done, but it's tedious. But with the size of communities, you can't, people have to wear multiple hats. So I tried to carve in what is today's modern all hazards fire EMS chief, and expanded on the credentialing. I know we're going to talk about that, but the rest of it is pretty straightforward. So you're aligned with a lot of your partners within the Wisconsin market. I've worked in Janesville, South Milwaukee, Wauwatosa, Menominee Falls, Monroe, Beloit, In a lot of these, that's what I did is I looked for all my job descriptions that I had and then looked for those areas that we could punch in this. And that's most of the red line stuff that's in there. And it's also terminology, things like standard operating procedures, used to be just procedures. Now they're SOPs and SOGs because there are guidelines and procedures. There's usually 2 good books now. So things like that are functionally part of a modern day fire department. I tried to carve into that. And so there's nothing, this should be, it was a great start that we had. It was just a matter of kind of filling in a little bit of the details to be a little bit more descriptive.
Do we know how this aligns with our current responsibilities? If you take, are we adding in, Tim, are you adding anything in that isn't there today per se?
I think probably in the written word, it's all things that are probably have been done. They just were not part of the formal job description up front.
Okay.
I would just add that prior to 1/1/23, we did not have EMS service.
Right.
So
So
that's,
Well,
That is-
that obviously adds a whole new wrinkle.
Well, and I think in the one version, most of the red, as I read through it, addresses that. The change, the emergency side of being fire chief, or we probably should change the name from fire chief to emergency management or whatever, but
This is a micro question, but when we had that fire at the Kennel Club area, who was in charge when it came to EMS, like emergency management system? Was that a shared position between both chiefs?
No, Chief Roush served as the emergency management director for the city. It was included, that is included in his title, where his title is in other locations. But for whatever reason, when those responsibilities were brought to that position, there was not a new position description
Okay.
for that updated. So, and I don't know if there was an increase in salary at the time, I'm not sure when that actually occurred. And maybe it had to do with the fact that Daryl Roush was a certified emergency management director. And to Tim's point, that is not a given for any individual who is a fire chief or who is a police chief, because when we do look at that certification section, it does reference the NIMS training and experience, and then several classes that would need to be completed to hold that certification.
Thank you.
the tendency for the fire chief to have this emergency management coordinator, EMC, for the emergency management agency, when you get into the world of acronyms, the reason that it fell into that structure was that law enforcement rarely is a big resource, has a big resource need, basically. Their operations tend to be they can be large scale, but they don't end up with the mitigation process of, using my example of an unfortunate tornado going through, when you're looking at, supplies from the state and backhoes and front end loaders and debris management, all those things kind of started to fall to the fire service because we tend to have a lot of big toys to begin with. It simplifies it a little bit too much, but in reality, we're usually the ones that are in need of larger scale support features for that type of an operation. But, on the smaller scale, you didn't need a ton of equipment. You just need a building. When we went through, vaccinations with COVID, that was emergency management function of getting those supplies and partnering with public health in order to be able to facilitate that. So it comes in all kind of different scales and everything, but historically, that's why it's fallen into the fire chief's lap, unless you're fortunate enough to be large enough where these are carve out positions. A lot of my larger clients have an emergency management coordinator that is the third tip of the triangle.
That's kind of what I was talking about. As I read through this, I questioned, do we really want to call the position a fire chief? Is the position an emergency management coordinator who has fire and all other emergency management under him or her?
I guess my rebuttal to that would be, I think the fire chief is more the focus of the day-to-day operations.
Correct.
Like I see it more as emergency management comes under fire chief, not the other way around. Because emergency management, I mean, is very rare. You at least hope that it is. It's certainly not the consistent day-to-day work that they are as the head of fire and EMS.
Well, except that fire falls under emergency.
Right, but
Right,
to
but
Tim's,
regardless of what, they would be much more fire and EMS than they would be emergency management.
In the
Significant.
realm of the market, it would be confusing. I think you need to keep it the fire EMS chief, although I will tell you, I'm doing a project right now. I'm hopping on a plane to Des Moines Wednesday morning in Urbandale, Iowa. The title of their fire chief is fire EMS chief / emergency management coordinator. It's a long name, but they carved that in. I have a couple of clients that recently did that where they wanted that in the formal front end name. So it wasn't just fire EMS chief, it was fire EMS chief - emergency management coordinator.
Or
If you
for
really wanna boil down-
for the city, not the county, because we've got county
Mhm.
emergency
but-
personnel.
Right.
So I think you start getting to be too long.
Well, what
And you
that
gotta
does,
explain it to the public.
yeah, and yes, it does require an explanation, but it scales it to the degree of the incident still has to have a home base, Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. Then you move to the county for resources. And if the county can't handle resources, you move to the state, then to the federal government. So it's a very scaled, that's part of that national incident management system. So the fact that you have titles of emergency management coordinator, you have one for Fort Atkinson, you have one for the county, you have one for the state, and then it goes to the federal government is a very common model of title. That my titles were that. But again, you don't have to do it as long as that the other duties described within the job description. I just thought I would give you an example how some communities are expanding that because they want it on the front end.
I will say we just had an incident over the weekend. We had storms and there was a lot of coordination required of city services and really our city engineer, public works director, Andy Selly, took the lead on that and organized management team meetings and logistics and the types of things that Tim referenced as far as where's the equipment coming from? It's not just responding to 911 calls. It is getting the folks on the ground, the resources that they need to do what they need to do. In this case, because it was a storm, obviously our fire and EMS personnel were out all over the city. Our police department was out all over the city doing things. But then our public works department was also out all over the city. We did not have power at our city facilities. So we were running our lift stations for our wastewater treatment plant and for all of our wastewater to make sure that people could still flush their toilets, right? So we had those on generators and we had to locate more generators and we had to locate backup generators because our police department's generator is 10 years beyond its useful life. So really in that realm, for this particular incident, Andy Selly took on that role. However, I mean, if this is part of the fire chief's job, then it needs to be clearly part of the job, and the certifications and training and whatnot that's required need to be part of that as well.
Well, are these certifications that were out or that are outlined here, are they, and I apologize, I don't know, but are these standard certifications, or is this something that we should expect every applicant to have, or they're not going to be qualified?
So they're hybrids to a degree, and let me explain that. So you look at Wisconsin State Fire Officer 1, Instructor 1, Inspector 1. These are first level credentialing, and their IFSAC, which is the International Fire Accreditation Congress, and then Pro Board. They're both agencies that basically validate the curriculum and the certification taught at the local level. There is no, they're somewhat of a credentialing clearinghouse between the two of them. And to a certain degree, if you really boil it down, they're competitors on whether or not you want to be Pro Board certified or IFSAC certified. Because the states throughout the country have taken it upon themselves, Illinois included, we run out of the State Fire Academy, which is at the University of Illinois in Champaign. They've created usually their own certification curriculum, certification models, not to necessarily meet the needs of their state. It's just that they're the localized talent. There was never a global initiative that would carry throughout the states. In fact, I wish there was, because it would make my life a lot easier. I do a lot of correlation work. When you're a certified fire officer 4 in Florida and you want to come to Illinois or you want to come to Wisconsin, I have to pair those up and see if they match. Now, if an organization has their accredited curriculum and accredited certifications, we're identifying here, that's nice, because whether you're from California and they taught it one way, or you're from Florida and they taught it another way, at the end of the day, they've been IFSAC or Pro Board certified, so we can feel comfortable that the credentialing is there. Whether you learned it in Illinois, whether you learned it in Wisconsin, so it gives you mobility throughout the country. Nobody is the certification police. I need to emphasize that most of this are industry, if not all, are industry standards, and the federal government has never established any particular requirements. States do. There are many states that will have, and it varies by state, they will have certain levels of credentialing that are required for positions. I will give you one example. Florida, you have to go through, if you come from out of state, you have to go through a certification process to perform in an LDDH environment, which is a life hazard environment. And you have to prove up that you have the knowledge of being able to do that through a testing process they have to create the correlation. So some of them get pretty defined with that. Wisconsin does not. Wisconsin, I think you've only got 57 or 59 constituted full-time career departments throughout the state. And so typically what happens is the driving force is the biggest book of business, which is volunteer fire departments and the number of people involved in that, because you cannot put these burdens on them. It would be nice if you could, because the danger of a volunteer firefighter fighting a house fire in some rural area is no different than it is in the city of Milwaukee. House fires are house fires are house fires. So from an incident command structure and all these things, the training that they go through, you wish you could. But when 80% of the country is served by volunteer firefighters, it's really tough to put that burden on them. But in the professional world of this, and I should say more the career, because I consider volunteers to be professionals. I sat on our state board for almost 20 years and worked very closely with them. These are things that are baseline. Quite frankly, there are fire officer certifications higher than this that a lot of agencies will require executive fire officer credentialing, or which is the EFO. That comes through National Fire Academy, or CFO, which is Chief Fire Officer designation, that comes through another acronym, CFSI, which is Center for Public Safety Excellence. They're an individual accrediting operation as well as agency-wide. A lot of those will require much higher level certifications for a fire chief position. This at least gets you in a foundation where you can be in the marketplace. Most people who apply for a job in Fort Atkinson are going to have these credentials, if not much higher. They'll be mastered level education. It's very, very much the norm now. They will clearly have EFO or CFO. They will have other state certified fire officer rankings all the way up through Fire Officer 4, which is about, when you look at the whole time it takes you to get that certification 1 through 4, is usually about a 4 to 5 year period. It's almost like a college degree. Most people have advanced beyond that, but I felt from a industry standard, you at least have to have these baselines in there. You don't want to be entertaining resumes from people who have maybe a lot of job experience, but don't have the formal education. Why does this consultant say that? Because the liability that's borne by the city of Fort Atkinson is huge if you don't have that. The process of litigation is failure to train. And that is always the foundation of a firefighter death when they start looking for the holes. So we're trying to plug some of these ahead of time. God forbid that were to happen. We hope it doesn't, but that you have at least a little bit of safety, of a safety net, that it was at least that can be taken out, that you weren't soft on that particular level of requirement within the job description, especially when this will be a new chief within the next 3-4 months.
So kind of sticking with that category, just looking at the minimum training and experience. Because two of the things that I had noted are also two of the things that Russ has noted on his email. One being that he and I are definitely in agreement of having and maintaining at least that EMS status of EMT. I think adding that is, to be totally blunt, I think we'd be crazy not to include that, given that that is such a significant part of that role and of that position now. I think for them, even just from a leadership standpoint, to be working with the staff of knowing that that is an individual who is also trained in that field. I see that as.
So is it
very
EMT
important.
or EMS?
EMS is the lower, correct?
No, EMR
Okay.
lower,
EMR.
EMT,
And
yeah.
that, I guess, I don't have an opinion one way or the other, and maybe that would be more, defaulting to you here about what would be the most appropriate, but I do think there needs to be some level of something related to that. in
Agree,
there.
agree. But is it paramedic? Because that's,
Yeah, and that
probably
that I
not.
don't- that-
So
yeah,
Tim,
that
why
I
don't you
don't
speak
think.
to the levels of certification there, EMR, EMT, basic, advanced and paramedic, please?
Right, so the EMR is emergency medical responder, that's off the table, that's gone, that is a basic first aid class. The EMT comes in a variety of different levels, and all that is skill sets. Paramedic being the highest, so most define it as EMTI, or EMTB for basic, EMTI for intermediate, EMTP for paramedic. So that's the scale as you go through, and you basically are certified in much higher levels of patient care. An EMTB can't start at an IV, but an EMTI can. And I would have to check and make sure that your medical system defines it that way, because again, there is no national standard. There is the national training, and you can be nationally registered. So a lot of people will have on their resumes NREMT and then / whatever their level is, BIP, for basic, intermediate, and paramedic. So, and I only bring that up is that the national registry, again, was created to try to have it set up so that I could be an EMTB or an EMTI in the state of Illinois, and I can go to Wyoming. And most project medical directors, so that's the doctor that takes on the liability and the responsibility of running your EMS system, will accept that national registry, because that means everybody's taking the same test. It isn't localized. When I got into this business in 1979, it was localized to the project medical director on what they wanted to teach and not teach. And this is always an education. I tell people in Lake County, Illinois, there are 5 different medical systems, and the treatment that you get in a very populous area, the treatment that you get varies 5 different ways based on what those project medical directors want to absorb as far as liability. It's a little bit tighter in Wisconsin, and I don't know every medical system through Wisconsin. I would be lying to you to say I do. But I just bring up the fact that level of care is based on what your EMS system, the emergency medical services system, project medical director, the head doctor, he's usually either the head of ER operations or somewhere close in proximity to that. They're the ones that write the standard operating procedures. They're the ones that control all the teaching and therefore the certification. And then they use the national testing in order to facilitate credentialing for the individual person. Now, here's the caution I bring to you. Smaller departments usually have to have a fire chief that is a jack of all trades, because of the fact that you never know, they might be jumping on an ambulance and have to provide patient care. An example for my career was I loved being a paramedic. I mean, I got into it because I was in pre-med, but I fell in love with street medicine. I eventually dropped my paramedic certification when I became a deputy chief, because I couldn't keep up with the certification with didactic time, clinical time, field runs, all those different things. Smaller department chiefs tend to end up having that happen naturally. So while EMT, I think, is a logical place to be, and whether it's a B or an I, realistically, I would have to talk, to a couple of people in that area and find out just how they're running and get more defined. I would not recommend going to paramedic, because you're putting a burden on the individual of, how many different things can you expect them to do? They're the emergency management coordinator and they have to stay certified with that. They are the fire chief and all the credentialing that goes on with that. And then EMS. It's a lot to jam into a person's life to be done properly. I mean, anybody can just do it to do it, but to be done properly. So any one of us going through Fort Atkinson has chest pains, we know we're going to get quality care if it is the fire chief that's going to be there. I also will caution that if you were to put paramedic in, you're going to really condense for just what I told you about as things scale up and responsibilities have increased, especially going through COVID and stuff like that. It opened up a lot of eyes. You will not find too many fire chiefs who are still paramedics.
Mhm.
There are more in Wisconsin because of the sizes of departments, but your pool of candidates will decrease dramatically if you raise the level of requirements too far. And I would not make EMS as a paramedic part of that conundrum. So I would aim for and that's why I put in there is, you know, if the current chief is not an EMT and wasn't required to be, do you want to have that in there? I only throw it out there. If you don't, you're fine. If you do, it just gives you operationally a better chance. But we may find out there are some fire chief candidates that could be strong candidates for you that may not have it. That's the only difficulty.
Could we list it as, you know, minimum requirement is EMTB, preferred EMTI?
You know, so we use EMT basic and EMT advanced and then paramedic.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have
Okay.
B, A, and paramedic.
Or could we do it?
Yeah.
I
that way?
think-
Kind of.
It's
I
a
think-
This is for.
I think the B,
You
we
do
should,
this.
B should be the minimum and
Yeah.
just leave it at
Okay.
that. I don't think the chief position traditionally has not been,
Super
you know,
cool. Yeah.
jumping
Yeah.
on those rigs. And we have a very highly qualified paid on call staff that we do take advantage of. We have paramedics, paid on call paramedics. So I would feel comfortable leaving the minimum requirement as an EMTB.
Perfect.
That makes sense.
I agree. I was just going to mention, we have to remind ourselves, we're looking for someone to oversee all of this. Not somebody to, you know, have degrees in all of it.
Right.
You know, we're looking.
Exactly.
We're looking
Exactly.
for a manager.
Yep.
Somebody
The
who at
other
least
thing-
has the experience in it, you know.
Yeah.
The other big thing I was gonna mention there, just there, I had down in my notes and rested in his, is about the bachelor's degree. I am definitely in agreement with him of noting that as preferred and not necessarily required. I would just hate to be in a position where we're potentially missing people who are super qualified with extensive experience, but just maybe, you know, 20 years ago didn't go to college
Yeah.
for that experience, but have gotten all of that education and training actually in the role since then.
So
That would just be my only
I would agree.
hesitation with that.
I would agree with that
Mm-hmm.
up into and including the point that our interim chief doesn't have that and does intend to
Mhm.
participate in the process. And I think from a cultural internal standpoint, that to exclude him because of that would be probably not the best thing to, I think it's best phrased as preferred.
I agree.
the thing I will caution you on is that there are people, employees, I guess, in our non-represented pay plan who are much lower on the pay plan list. Their pay grade is much lower than this, and there's bachelor's degrees required for many of the management team who are at different and much lower salary ranges than this position.
On the other hand, if it's the best candidate for the job, I mean, I can take that, argument and say, does the education make the person, or does the person, do and represent themselves in the best way for our community? And a lot of people have gone through life and done very well without degrees. And
And I think given all the additional certifications and things that are required with this position that may not be associated with other positions that require a bachelor's degree, because the majority of the education they might need for that role comes from that degree, whereas I think it's realistic to argue that the majority of the education needed for this role comes from those certifications and
Yep.
that kind of ongoing training and education.
I agree with both of you, and getting back to my original point, we're looking for a manager. We're looking for, I was a supervisor most of my career, overseeing people who did things I don't think I could have done if I had to
Mhm.
do it. And you know, and you're looking for different skills at each level, and you know, we had a supervisor of maintenance, but he he oversaw people who did refrigeration, that he wasn't real strong at, people who, you know, did
That's
different things, you know, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a supervisor.
a generalist with specialties.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
to be honest.
Exactly right.
Would the commission have some entertainment of then language that says bachelor's degree preferred or associate's degree with an identifiable level of career experience that would be commensurate with what would go into a baccalaureate? I mean, I already know what the curriculum is for a bachelor's degree. I already know what those requirements are, and very purposefully they're designed. Again, go back to the liability of the city. If you, and I say this with all the respect in the world, but if you take this down too low and you do have a problem, there is a culpability with the fact that this was not credentialed at a level that would meet what a lot of your agencies around the area have. Even Monroe, which is smaller than you, required a bachelor's degree. But there have been occasions where I've had the associate's degree with a level of, you know, I'll call it career experience that would give you the value of what they can do. I have a candidate right now for a project that is a very successful chief out of Texas. And has an associate's degree with tons of experience, and we're considering him and talking to the client about it because we can put that together. I think if you say bachelor's degree preferred and the next level underneath that is a high school education, that's got some vulnerabilities that I just, from an industry standpoint, I want to just bring to the commission's attention.
I think that that's a point very well taken. And at the same time, we can vet that in our process with the notations that you've given us about liability. I mean, you know, the liability aspect can touch so many different aspects of this process that's just one of them. So I would be okay with bachelor preferred, understanding your advice, Tim, and that we look, again, we're looking for the best qualified candidate, not one or another. Or we're not looking for second best, so to speak here. I don't think any of us are.
And
We
I
want to
agree, I
find the
guess-
best person for
Yes.
the job.
And liability wise, I guess I'd rather put in that additional time down the road if we do have someone that we're really excited about and that seems like they would be a great fit for the position, but they don't have a bachelor's degree, then maybe that's a bigger conversation. Maybe that's an Attorney Westrick conversation of, do we have any concerns? You know, I guess I would rather have to go that route than potentially miss some very good people.
Well, and then you get to the point, what's our policy or practice, forget policy, but what's our guideline or practice for educating anybody within city government to advance themselves in their career? What kind of program is about? I again, I don't know, but
We have programs, we pay for education.
Yeah, which I think is wonderful as well. We should, but we may get somebody that, you know, that's a contingent on hiring is, you know, the fact that they've got to complete certain things. Don't know. I'm trying to keep options open.
Well, and I think if you use that terminology, bachelor degree preferred, you are going to candidates and saying, well, we prefer somebody with a bachelor's degree. What skills do you have that might overcome that?
Mhm.
And because you're going to have to do that. If all things are equal and this one's got a bachelor's degree, guess who gets the position? You know.
But they've got to be a presentable candidate
Yeah.
too, not just because
Yeah.
they have a degree.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, no, that's what I'm
Last time
saying.
we looked for chiefs, we looked at a number of chiefs that frankly had a lot of credentials and they were not a good fit. We chose a very good man for the job.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's fresh in my memory.
Yeah.
Even though it was 6 or 7 years, how long ago did Daryl come? 7?
I think 7.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so.
So does this commission want to do bachelor's preferred with, and as Tim suggested, with the associate's degree with a certain level of experience, or just that bachelor's preferred language?
Let's go around. Gene, we haven't heard you.
Yeah, there's one word that I want to put as equivalent. I know sometimes like if there's an associate degree equivalent, just another word, just trying to describe it a little bit better, just so it, like we said, we were just saying, if the person has the experience, has the credentials, has the certifications, is that equivalent to an associate's? And I think that's what Tim was trying to say there, that. when
No,
we look at
actually, I'm not. I'm
associate-
saying the associate's degree is still foundationally its own thing. The
Mm,
equivalency would be the years of experience they have, you know, let's say they're coming
see.
from Milwaukee and they've been a very successful chief there. That we would couple that together, which would give you then their ability to compete in the pool of candidates to be bachelor's preferred. So it's hard to go from high school with a career to saying that that's the equivalent of bachelor's preferred. So I'm trying to bridge that and tighten it up and say associate's degree with a level of career experience that now I can consider you to have a life experience to give you the bachelor's degree.
Just to
So
clarify,
with-
too, it also doesn't note in here a high school diploma required. Is it supposed to?
Well, because when I wrote it with the bachelor's required, so the assumption is you don't scale that within the
Okay.
job description
Yep.
with all the other
Yep.
prerequisites.
Well,
Well, and that
But
was in
it's
there already.
almost that saying because somebody could submit an application or a resume and we probably wouldn't get past the first cut.
Right.
I mean, we have our own weeding process here.
And I guess that's my thing, is given the certification list that we have, given that the second bullet point says 5 years of progressively responsible experience with at least 3 years management experience. My vote is bachelor's preferred.
And
Right.
let's leave the associate part out.
Yes.
Yeah, I would,
Yes, okay.
because if you're saying bachelor's preferred, you're leaving yourself the flexibility
Yes.
of determining what overrides that.
Mhm.
What does why is this candidate so strong that it overrides that preference?
Right.
And we don't start listing things that might, let's just leave it at bachelor's preferred and gives us the flexibility of saying.
Do we need a motion on that? Rebecca?
It's just as long as everybody has weighed in, I think that I'll have the direction to
Okay.
to redraft this.
And I've
I just-
updated that in my copy, Rebecca, so.
I
What's
just have
that?
one question for Tim.
Mhm.
Sorry, so if we take that part out, we just say bachelor's preferred, does that affect the pool? Like if we don't say associates, it just seems like it'll be a wider group to pull from if we don't even mention associates.
Well, knowing the way my marketplace works, I always like to give examples. I just finished a project in Scott County, Iowa, where it was an emergency medical services director. Their EMS is countywide, separate from the fire departments. We had a lot of people who didn't have any credentials applying for it because it was a very soft posting, if I want to call it that. The only concern I have is I go through a very strong vetting process. And I guess I would ask permission, based on my experience of the commission, to allow me to scrub those candidates on a much lighter evaluation of their backgrounds, because I'll get every volunteer firefighter that thinks it can be a fire chief. That's going to apply. A part of these, while that's not the purpose of a job description, it kind of does put you in that Fort Atkinson is a professional organization. This is what we want, and these are the credentials that we think our senior leadership team should have, to prevent a little bit of that. So we will probably see a much broader pool of candidates because they'll read underneath that really quick. And if they have a high school degree and 5 years of being a volunteer firefighter somewhere, and because it's a small department, those tend to be popularity contests for promotion. That's the history of the culture. There's still a lot of fire chiefs across the country that are by vote. I have a department I worked with on the East Coast. They automatically change the chief every 2 years, so everybody gets a turn. I find that to be ludicrous. So you understand who I am. I'm a very honest person in my conversations. So anyway, it will, going back to your question, Commissioner, it will open up the pool of people, assuming they have the ability to do this job.
That's awesome. This is a question that came to mind.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
it's super.
Thank you.
Where, Megan, where is it? I'm trying to find the number of years of experience.
It's right under, so if you go under minimum training and experience. that heading, It's the
page
second, yeah,
three.
page 3, it's the second bullet point under the minimum.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you bet.
And
see.
one other explanation, because of the scaling and the paramilitary structure of the fire service, you've got that 5 years and it says experience at a lieutenant level or above. I do want to explain that. While that was in there already, that's not my language, but a lot of fire departments, especially post-recession, had cutbacks, and there are many in my area where the rank structure goes first line supervisor, lieutenant, and then there is no captain, battalion chief, assistant chief, chief. They go right from lieutenant, and the next command position is the chief. We see a lot of that in Wisconsin marketplace. We see a lot of it throughout the Midwest. So that is a safe place to be, because I can get somebody who's a lieutenant that's wearing multiple hats, going back to my original discussion of the fire chief / EMS chief / emergency management coordinator. These small agencies tend to put a lot of pressure on their first line supervisors to do a lot of extracurricular stuff. And we'll look at that and look through what their job responsibilities were. So it just, because normally for a fire chief position, I see captain, battalion chief or above, not a first line supervisor, but it's just where the market is and what we think we would be drawing from.
Can I ask-
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, going back to your other point about, hey, we'll get applicants who've been a paid on call for 5 years who think then that they could be a chief. Does it make sense anywhere in here to include language of having this experience in a professional capacity? Meaning
I would
people who
use the
have
term
been-
career.
Sure, yes. But so that means.
So we could have 5 years of progressively responsible public safety experience in a career setting with at least 3 years management experience at the lieutenant level or above.
Like, I wonder if that makes sense and would help kind of with that filtering a little bit of, hey, it's not it's going to tell those paid on call folks, whereas, hey, we're not saying you're not qualified, but you maybe haven't had the career level experience yet to have a role like this.
Sure.
And you're touching on something that I wanted to get at, and that's with this at least 3 years management experience. What's the budget of the fire department? Roughly.
$1.7 million.
Okay, so it's a significant resource. It's a significant department. It strikes me that at a threshold minimum, we'd want more than 3 years of management experience as a bare minimum. To me, that's more important than a degree. And I'm asking, why would we not go to 5 years? I mean, that's saying a 10-year professional by your description with 5 years. And then of that, your management could be part of the 5 years, or it could be in addition to the 5 years, the way I read this. And if we're looking for experience with, how many are in the department now total?
45.
Yeah, I mean, this is not this isn't a small town fire department anymore. So we're going to want somebody with a track record, and 3 years of management experience seems awfully light to me for running a department of that size and scope.
If I may interject,
Please.
quick. When you look at the scale of having the baccalaureate with the 3 years, they tied together comfortably because there's the education piece. Now that the education piece has been lowered to a more accessible level, it is a recommendation, then you up that years of experience, just exactly as you're saying, Commissioner.
That would make sense.
And do you think including that career terminology supports that too?
I would love it. The more definition, the better.
Do you guys, I mean,
I agree.
that was just my thought of, it weeds out then those folks who maybe have only paid on call experience
Right.
from
I agree.
believing they would be
Yeah,
qualified.
But that
to apply.
yeah, let's deal with that question. I would agree with that.
I do too. Mhm.
Gene, thank you.
I agree,
Okay,
I agree.
good
All right, I'll
suggestion.
make that change right now.
Tim, the other question I have, and this is my understanding, when you have a paid on-call department, culturally, it's very different than a full-time department. And I would think we would want candidates that have proven experience in managing both a full-time and paid on-call as a candidate. We don't need somebody coming in that hasn't had that experience and then pulling levers and upsetting the culture. It's hard enough to get paid on call people to begin with. We don't want to alienate them.
I would totally agree. I usually do that within the confines of the position announcement, the PA, and it's also in the brochure. That's what we're looking for when we broaden the discussion, if you want to call it that. It's sometimes found in job descriptions and sometimes not. So it really becomes, your will. If it doesn't hurt to have it in there, but it will be in the advertisement anyway. That's that's what my responsibility is to weed that out and make that evaluation of where they're coming from. I research their departments, structures, everything. If it's, a very strong collectively bargained, I look at what they're doing with that. And whether or not they've taken on new models, so it's going to be addressed. It's whether or not you want to have it in the job description. It works. There's no harm in putting it in.
Okay. Is there an opinion?
I guess just for consistency's sake, if it's gonna be in the
Yeah.
announcement, it probably makes sense to have it in the description then too.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think it should all be transparent.
Dick?
I
Yeah.
agree, I agree.
All right, thank you, Tim. We'll go with that amendment.
You guys are good. I was just gonna hop over then, just looking at the other notes that are on here, under physical requirements about the vision requirement note there. I know on Russ's email, he said that he didn't think it was necessary since they have to have a valid driver's license and that is already required. I just didn't know what we thought, because technically your license is valid for 10 years, right? And are we comfortable with the potential that maybe someone hasn't had a vision test in 8 or 9 years?
Is there a pre-employment physical?
Well, and that was the other thing I had down is, do we require, so like there's these physical requirements, would they have to submit basically a physical to prove or to show
I
that
don't
they
know
are
what procedure is.
healthy to
Rebecca.
do
Is
this
that a-
position?
I don't have a problem with it being in there and that's a requirement, and to say, well, if he's got a license, he already had. But it's a requirement of this position. I would leave it in there.
The vision test.
Vision, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not right now. They're
Right,
suggesting
it's-
if we want
it's
to add it.
right.
But do you know, Rebecca, like, can there be a requirement to complete and submit a physical?
I'm
that
sure,
you've had
yes.
Within the last 3 months? or-
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's usually a
Something like that.
pre-employment physical. Everything's
I
contingent.
mean, could we just say that including a vision test?
Sure.
Like that would just kind of be all encompassing?
Yeah, I think that's part of the, when we make, if there's an offer, that it would require
Contingent
passing
Yeah.
the physical,
Okay.
which would also include a vision exam.
Does that
Yeah.
also,
There's a national standard for that, NFPA 1582. And most departments, their doctors evaluate firefighters under those structures, and vision's one of them. So you don't really need to get, I've had job descriptions where it says, must have 20/20 in one eye and 20/40 in the other eye. But that's all built within the NFPA physical. So if you just had must be able to pass a department physical upon conditional offer, that works fine. Sometimes job descriptions have a calendar feature to it, because departments will test every year. They have to, be able to pass a physical every year. And if you don't, you're out. I don't know if that's carved within, that's not a job description. I would think, I'm not an attorney, but I would think that'd have to be in, ordinances of the city. That would be the case, and I believe under Wisconsin law, because of that's the charge of the Police and Fire Commission for hiring, firing police chiefs and fire chiefs. I don't know where those two meet in the middle. You'd have to talk to corporate counsel about that, but I could put in there that just must pass a pre-employment physical based on industry standards. Whether you adopt NFPA 15.2 specific, you would certainly want to have your doctor doing a physical under NFPA 15.2 because it's different than what we get as civilians.
Okay.
Two other things that I had noted that I just didn't know if this is anything that needs to be included in the job description, because I don't know enough about if it requires specific program use or anything, but the two things that I just thought about were when it comes to billing, since that's obviously such a big piece of the EMS side of the business now, like, does the fire chief oversee anything specifically related to billing for EMS services? I mean, I know we have the company that
Yeah.
we do the billing through, but it was that one. And then I didn't know when it came to the MABUS system, if that is anything that needed to be specifically noted
No.
in terms of, okay.
Yeah,
And I
going
think-
backwards, MABUS is just nothing more than an operational function. So you've got subliminal comments throughout here about being regionalized and working with local stakeholders. That would include MABUS as a
Okay.
functional operation. And then the question about the billing, I can't remember if you use PBS or who you use, but
We use LifeQuest.
oh, LifeQuest. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been in that environment. It's no more demanding than knowing how your budgeting is structured, because most of that is electronically turned over. A lot of fire chiefs don't even see that stuff anymore. It's so automated through the EMS system software packages. So yeah, I don't think there would be any statement that would have any binding capability in the job description. It's probably not that necessary.
Okay, great. Thank you.
If I may go back to the commission, because I'm editing as we go, so I can turn this around to Rebecca when we're done. So under the minimum training, I've got bachelor's degree preferred in fire science, public administration, or closely related field. We don't carve that into to cut us. We went from 3 to 5 years. My statement I made for the combination department, of which is that's what you are considered in the industry, was must have demonstrated work history of working in a combination fire EMS department. Very simple statement. And then we know that we're going to require the EMT, so I'll update that. And working down under physical requirements must pass a pre-employment physical based on industry standards. And then underneath that, we don't need the vision, because I'll strike that out, because that will be covered under the physical. So I think that catches us up for editing purposes.
You can delete that FLSA overtime status exempt. That's on the front. It's on the very top of the job description is FSLA category exempt.
Okay.
Rebecca, one thing I did have a question about, kind of going back to liability, and maybe this is just the standard wording, but under the language ability and interpersonal communication, the second bullet point talks about ability to provide counseling. And that just kind of threw me a little. I
I
understand
think
it from,
it's
like, a
counseling in
leadership
terms
standpoint.
similar to mediation between employees, right? Like,
Okay, I was thinking it more as
Interdepartmental.
like, I was thinking more like trauma that they might experience at a
well,
situation.
I mean, I think we do have access to some sort of IAP, don't we, Courtney, for as far as trauma goes, right?
Okay.
So we would not, this does not mean that we have an expectation of our fire chief to be, some sort of
therapist. Yes,
therapist,
okay.
right? Right.
Perfect.
Great. Any other questions? Tim, are you caught up?
Yes, I am totally caught up. This is perfect, because a lot of the position announcement has these details, so we knew we could not get to the point of advertising. And so now this will allow me to finish up the position announcement. So Rebecca and I have already gone over where we're going to put that advertisement. I think there was a question from the commission while I'm here, on Zoom. You're going to get national reach with this. In fact, our company is so popular now, we're getting international reach. I get people from the Middle East on every project. They
I heard
rarely
Saudi
qualify.
Arabia, they want to export a bunch of fire
Oh,
workers.
literally, they are pleas for help. They are like, please find me a job in the United States, and they
Yeah.
apply.
I've heard that. What's the market look like? Yeah, I mean, are we at a bad time? I mean, hiring in general is tough.
Yeah. It is, it's a daunting task right now. The percentage of return for most of my applicant pools right now are down by 40 to 50%, might even be higher than that. It is a tough market out there. It was made, the comment made earlier about, 25 years ago, I didn't start out having a bachelor's degree. Well, 25 years ago was 1998. 23 years ago was 2000. And so when you look at that, the reason I frame that is what's gone on since then: 2 recessions, post 9/11, and then 2007, 8, 9, 10, however you want to carve that. And obviously inflation now post COVID, and a whole generation that grew up with 0% financing on my Ford pickup truck for 72 months, and interest rates that were 3.3%, 3.4% for a house. Now they're north of 7.5 and creep into 8. It has really changed the scope of what's going on. So things are difficult right now. Scott County, Iowa, for the EMS director, I only had 13 applicants. Urbandale, Iowa, it's a West Des Moines community, very well-structured, desirable area. I had 19. Even Orlando last year was 71. Normally an Orlando project would net 200. So it is a difficult market out there. The other thing you run up against in Wisconsin, to get into a little bit of a rabbit hole, is WRS. With the Wisconsin retirement system, it is based on the scale of, the last 3 years of your highest pay. So the problem that you have, unlike I have in Illinois, is I can freeze my pension in one place and go to another. So to give you an example, I can go from a larger department to a smaller department, and I don't get hurt in my retirement benefits. It does in Wisconsin, because then you have to regrow that up.
Tim, actually, it's the highest years. It's
Or the
not the
highest
last
years,
years.
yeah.
So
So-
it is the highest years.
Okay, so it's the highest years. And so to that end, the only crossover people with experience you can possibly get is Milwaukee, because Milwaukee's like Chicago. They have their own separate retirement system. So the smaller departments in Wisconsin are a lot tougher to recruit for. We beat the bushes really strong. I've got a lot of networking in Wisconsin. I know a lot of chiefs in the state. We will do it the best we can. But if I'm at, $110,000 as a battalion chief in some community, Janesville, so it's not that far away, as an example, or up in Madison, my migratability to a smaller department is not there, because what my drop in pay may be, it depends. We have to see what we're going to get in the way of candidates. Forces them to rebuild that back up. And I've talked to many Wisconsin chiefs about how that is. It's not like I'm making it up. They told me that when I started doing work in Wisconsin regularly. So it's just something to be aware of. I don't run in fear from it. I have placed super strong chiefs in Menominee Falls, in Wauwatosa, 3 battalion chiefs in Beloit, the current chief of Beloit, the assistant chief of Beloit, and the former deputy chief, or the now deputy chief of Beloit. I've done work up in Janesville, Wisconsin. So this is not, it's not like you can't do it, but I just always am honest with people about where you're at. Locale will be a benefit, actually. And it's just something to know about these little mechanics in the background and how much they influence the discussion on whether or not I'm going to pick up my family and move it. There's a lot of moving parts to this right now, and I'm realistic with it and sensitive enough to it, because it's how I talk to my candidates too, because I do understand what they're going through. I'm seeing a lot of last minute. I think I'm jumping out of this because I'm just not certain it's the right time. Unprecedented numbers and we're running across that in government positions, and we do it all. I mean, GovHR is known for the fact that you can hire a finance director to an economic development coordinator to a school superintendent. We do everything that you can think of. And so we have a very large presence in the marketplace, so we can see these trends, and they are trending down. Hopefully, if things stabilize here, which they seem to have been, that may be something of an indicator for the future, that people will start getting a little bit less cautious about what they're doing. So I just offer that up as from my experience.
Thank you. Does the city have a relocation policy for people?
That was part of my contract, but no, that we have not. I mean, we could offer that as part of an agreement.
Okay, it is an option though, when we, okay. Didn't know if there was a policy guideline, but okay, thank you. Okay. Dick, you have another question?
No,
Oh, it
No.
looked like you were getting ready.
no, I always look perplexed.
No, you didn't look perplexed. You looked like you were gonna ask a question. Is there anything else, Rebecca, to come before us?
Nope.
Okay,
I'll move
nothing
to
on the
adjourn.
agenda. There's a motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. We are adjourned.